Hello, my name is Kristen Sarver, and I work with the Utah Criminal Justice Center. We'd like to welcome you here for today's presentation, Using Program Data to Reduce Recidivism. I will be covering the first part of the presentation, later joined by Jessica Seawright, a research analyst at the Utah Criminal Justice Center. And then the session in 2 weeks will be presented by Derek Muller, a senior research analyst with the Utah Criminal Justice Center. So essentially what we're focusing on today is this idea of dosage, and that moderate risk offenders should receive more treatment than low risk offenders, while high risk offenders should receive more treatment than both low risk and moderate risk offenders. And what we know from program evaluations is that if we aren't tracking that this is happening, we can't know that it's happening. There are also, I think, some other complexities with tracking dosage in terms of thinking about how it is specific to each offender that we're working with. So for example, if you have someone whose needs are high in the areas of substance use and pro-criminal thinking, the dosage should be highest in interventions that target those domains versus someone whose risk areas are higher in terms of maybe antisocial thinking and also antisocial personality patterns. So in general, we're talking not just about treatment overall, but also treatment that targets the correct domains with the most services. The target for today's discussion really is risk level, and the reason for that is that in general, when we have someone in treatment or on supervision meeting with us, that tends to be the time of most compliance, right? So when the person is in sort of structured interventions targeting behavior, we see them doing well. Once they're discharged from treatment and or supervision, we don't necessarily see corresponding impacts on long-term recidivism. So the goal of this session today is to really talk about how do you use dosage to see reductions in assessed level of risk with the assumption that that will result in reduced recidivism in the long term. The study of dosage is very much rooted in the R&R risk need responsivity model. So the process we're talking about dosage is really to think about treatment in something of a medical model, in that you want to assess to identify the extent and the nature of the concern, right? So how high risk is this person, including the root causes, right? So what are the needs that are driving the offending behavior, and also patient characteristics. Once we've done the assessment, we want to identify a range of potential interventions with demonstrated effectiveness in treating the concern, right? So again, we want to look at the things like cognitive behavioral therapy, like role plays that we know have an impact on recidivism. And we want to apply those to the needs that we've identified. And then the final stage is to really determine a course of treatment. And treatment, of course, as it does with medicine, includes the amount, frequency, and duration of services, right? So we're saying, how serious is this person? How serious is the problem? How high risk are they of recidivating? What interventions do we have to treat that? And how much of those interventions does the person need? And again, I think this is often a hard thing to achieve in social service programs, because often we're doing assessments, but the way programs are structured, folks all get the same kind of, so you might see differences between outpatient and intensive outpatient, but everyone in outpatient is getting the same level and everyone in intensive outpatient is getting the same level. And this model is really asking us to adjust that based on risk of recidivism. So what we know about dosage, we know that too little treatment will not reduce risk. We know that too much treatment can increase risk. And we know that at a certain amount of treatment, there are no additional reductions in risk. So given strapped resources, right, there's a point beyond which we don't want to be providing treatment anymore because it's not achieving its goals. When we talk about dosage, and you will see figures, I mean, these vary somewhat, that you want with moderate risk offenders to be getting somewhere between 100 and 199 hours of treatment, that for higher risk offenders, you want to be going up to 200 or maybe 250 hours of treatment. But I think there's an important thing to think about with this, which is really, how do we count treatment? So one way that you could do that is length of treatment. Like the person, for example, is in treatment for 6 to 9 months or 3 to 9 months, right? That you're tracking, and I'm sure most of your programs do that, obviously. an in date, a start date, and an end date. You could also track hours in treatment, right? So if you have someone participating in an intervention that goes for 8 weeks and is 2 hours a week, right, you would have 16 hours in treatment. So not just length, but actually hours in treatment. And that gets you to this idea of concentration, right? That if you provide those 200 hours of treatment to a high-risk offender, but you provide it over the course of 10 years, you're probably not achieving what you want, right? So you want the dosage to be intense enough that you're saying, typically for treatment, we say it should be about 3 to 9 months, and that we want to achieve either 100 or 200 hours in that 3 to 9 month time frame, right? So you're thinking both about how long in treatment and how intense is the treatment. Another way to think about dosage is treatment targets. We know that folks are high risk because they are high risk in a number of assessed areas, right? So they're not high risk of recidivism just because they have acute substance abuse needs. They're high risk in recidivism because they have acute substance abuse needs, plus some antisocial personality patterns, plus some antisocial thinking, plus very little structure and achievement around education and employment, right? So when you're targeting high-risk offenders, you don't want all of those hours, for example, to be in just substance abuse. You want to be hitting more treatment targets, and the more the better. There is some interesting research now around kind of increased difficulty, right? That dosage should be conceptualized as kind of, as the person is going through, they're doing things that are harder, right? So the practice is harder, that it matters more at a certain point, that what they're doing requires more skill on their part. I think there's an important question here too around what counts as dosage. So attendance counts. I know in a program that we looked at recently, they were tracking dosage by how the person was assigned to a program. So if they were assigned to treatment that was 16 hours, that they got credit for 16 hours. But in tracking dosage, you might also think about attendance. Does someone show up, or are they missing sessions? Are they showing up late? Are they leaving early, right? So if they're only there for half of the session, for that individual, you probably don't want to count that as a full hour of treatment. Participation and engagement is another way to think about what counts as dosage. So typically if you are assessing offenders for motivation and realizing that they need some motivational interventions in order to engage in treatment, you wouldn't count those motivational interventions as part of the dosage of treatment, right? So that doesn't mean they don't matter. It means that they have to happen, but they still need those 100 to 200 hours of treatment that really targets recidivism. So again, if you're thinking about these things, you would be for each individual tracking attendance, tracking tardiness, tracking leaving early, looking at motivation and kind of deciding when the person is at the level of motivation that you're going to start counting treatment participation. And or maybe some measure of participation while they are actually in treatment sessions. The types of interventions that you are counting as dosage matter as well, right? So when I say types of interventions, in this case, I really mean kind of formal interventions, right? So participation in cognitive behavioral therapy obviously would count. There are questions about something like case management, for example. If case management is targeting really conditions of supervision or kind of just process through goals, you probably wouldn't count that as dosage. If your case management does include some direct interventions, you probably would count that as dosage. So again, thinking about really what are the formal activities that someone is engaging in, you are counting as treatment dosage. And what are the activities, again, in the case of case management, that definitely need to happen, but that might not count as dosage. The other thing to think about is, are there types of activities that are informal or maybe quasi-formal that might also count as dosage? So there is some good research right now suggesting that for incarcerated persons, having regular contact with family members can reduce recidivism. So there might be a way to build in a kind of tracking of hours for contact with family, or increasing contact with family members and counting that as dosage. And with that, I think also maybe having some participation with treatment staff or correctional staff to kind of help the family understand how they can provide support and assistance to the individual once they're released, and also working on that relationship while the person is incarcerated. So I think thinking about all of the things that someone is doing and how does that tie into your case plan. And then the other thing to think about is that just the portion of treatment that is treatment. So I think in this particular session, which obviously is only half an hour long, I was very conscious of, I'm going to spend 2 minutes doing the introductions, right? If I had more time, I might have spent 15 minutes doing introductions, right? In either case, I don't want to count that introductory period as part of dosage. So I think when you're thinking of persons in treatment, really thinking about, legitimately for every 1 hour in a cognitive behavioral group, 15 minutes of that are administrative, which is fine, right? But you would only count 45 minutes as actual dosage. And then finally, I think when you are tracking dosage, so our next stage of this will be to talk about a spreadsheet that all of you were given. Our hope with that is to have you fill that out and send it back to us prior to the next session, to really think about, with your current data systems, what are you tracking, what can you track, and what can you know about your treatment processes based on that, and then obviously, ideally help you think about ways that you maybe could start tracking things differently and be intentional about how you're monitoring dosage. So when you're looking at your dosage figures, I think these are some of the questions you want to think about, which is that you want to know, do high-risk offenders actually get more treatment than lower-risk offenders? Do offenders get more treatment in high-need areas, right? So that would say that you could have two folks whose risk level is the same, but one is really high risk in terms of substance abuse and antisocial thinking. And another one is somewhat lower need in substance abuse, but is high need in antisocial thinking and an antisocial personality pattern. So impulsivity, aggression, sort of low social control areas, right? So the treatment should look different for those two folks. One should be getting treatment that really targets substance abuse and thinking, and one should be getting treatment that is focused more on kind of self-control and antisocial thinking. And those hours should match the assessment results. Do offenders get credit for activities that do not reduce risk? So I think this is interesting, for example, in incarcerated settings, right? We know that there's potentially kind of deleterious effects for incarceration, right? So you might provide structured activities such as recreation that try to kind of sort of stave off the deleterious effects, but you wouldn't want to necessarily count that as dosage. So really thinking about what activities are specifically risk targeted. Another one would be getting treatment, getting credit for treatment. Again, we talked about this, in which they do not participate or engage, right? So if someone isn't attending, if someone isn't participating, if someone is completely unmotivated, that you probably don't want to count that as dosage, because they're in some way not there. Do programs count hours spent in administrative, case management, or supervising activities as dosage? Again, I think that's just thinking about the structure of your groups and interventions, how much of that is actually work and how much of that is administrative. And then the other thing I think to think about is, do programs assess fidelity to interventions? So again, if someone who is not trained on an intervention is conducting the intervention, can you expect dosage to count, right? Can you expect that intervention to have those hours to actually be moving someone towards lower risk because the trainer isn't conducting the intervention to fidelity? Jessica is about to jump on here in a second to go through the spreadsheet with you all, but I do want to also highlight, there's interesting research now in Dosage that really looks at role-playing and the huge impact that role-playing can really have on recidivism, and that tracking the number of role plays someone does per week is maybe a very important way for you to understand how your program is having an impact on moderate and high risk offenders. So I think the number is 3. Jessica, jump in if I'm getting this wrong, but that offenders who participate in 3 role plays per week versus not less than that have reduced recidivism.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to share the references. So I believe this is Sperber 2017, right, Christian? So we'll share that reference with you all, and in the email that you'll receive after this event. So that's a reminder that you will get the slides, Christian slides from today's presentation, as well as a reference list after this event. Thanks for being here. And I'm just going to pick up and sort of talk about the practice or the practical part of this session and set us up for next time, which is October 22nd. Again, my name is Jessica Seawright, and yeah, you should have received a spreadsheet that from Emily Breen in preparation for this event, which I'm going to share right now. So this spreadsheet, the goal is really to give us a common place, common communication to share data. Our hope is that you all will consider submitting some of your data so that next week, in 2 weeks, the next event, Derek will be able to review and offer some feedback and some analysis of data that you submit. Now, of course, this data should be de-identified and something that you're comfortable sharing with the group. But here you can see the dosage worksheet. The way that it was set up, it will not necessarily be a perfect fit or translation from the system that you're working with, the electronic health record, or the way that you keep your data. However, I'm going to sort of review it quickly, and we'll be available at UCJC at utah.edu to talk about this spreadsheet, talk about questions you're having if you are interested in submitting some of your data for the following event. So you can see here on tab 1, we're asking you to pick up to 10 clients, so up to 10 clients who are no longer in treatment, and fill this out to the best of your ability. So you can see it's asking for the assessment name, maybe the LSRNR, the risk level that was assessed, and the risk score. If you're not using a risk need responsivity or a risk assessment, we hope that you'll just tell us a little bit about how you're assessing the risk of your clients, and tell us about the needs you've identified. We're asking you to focus in on the top 3 that you want to target, the highest needs identified. Give us the domain, the score, and also tell us when that person started the program and when they ended the program. So as you can already hear, I'm coming in from a program evaluator kind of bird's eye view. And so this is the first step. We're looking at the assessment that's completed. We want to know how you're deciding what treatment is appropriate. And then what we'll ask you to do is just consider these next tabs and again, fill out to the best of your ability. When we're looking at treatment, it's rolling up. So from 2C, you'll see that I'm asking, what type of intervention are you offering? Say a specific group. What are the targets of that intervention? Is it antisocial thinking? Is it a substance use focused group? What are you targeting? List those out. Is it a group intervention or the individual intervention? Because we really want those individual sessions with treatment providers, counselors, to be focusing in on the targets as well. So you may say that they have both groups and individual, and add rows here. If they're in a group, how many attendees are there? How many facilitators? That helps us consider the ratio. And Christian mentioned this, but the quality assurance, has group observation taken place? So do you know how many minutes are spent really getting into the intervention, and how many are about business or introductions and small talk? And you may need to think about how that is impacting your dosage. This rolls up to 2B. And again, please feel free to reach out by email. I know this may translate, but you may have questions. So we're here to talk about it. But again, 2B, we're looking at you to use your client, identify the criminogenic needs, the interventions that you're using to target those criminogenic needs. And then from that previous tab, tell us the total number of hours they spent in an intervention per week, and the number of weeks the participant was in your program, and that helps us get to the total number of hours that they spent in the intervention. I know it will be more complicated and there'll be more detail to there, but that's what we're working towards when we want to look at group dosage. So please reach out to talk about those specific details as needed. As we look at your groups and your interventions, we determine the hours. That takes us here to the treatment tab, where you can tell us the total number of hours that say I spent in treatment and compare that to my risk level that we determined in tab 1. And finally, looking at tab 3, you have your client list. And this is looking at the role play that Christian mentioned at the end there. We want to look at what interventions are you using? What are your targets? Reinforcing that you're targeting particular criminogenic needs in your intervention. Is it a group or individual session, and a number of attendees? And then really looking at how many times during that intervention did the client role play? How many participants were a part of that group, and how many of those participants completed the role play? And that rolls up to this third tab, where we're bringing it all together, and we're looking at the risk level of your client, the treatment hours they received, and the number of role plays per week. And this is coming from the Spreadsheet 2017 article, looking at how we determine dosage. Again, it may not be a perfect fit for your data. We're here to work that out, and we really hope that some of you all will consider submitting de-identified data via this spreadsheet, so that we can get some practical examples that really matter to you and start to think of how we're using program data to build in and reduce recidivism. Please, I'm going to give you all a moment to go ahead and put any questions that you have in the chat or the Q&A. We've got Derek here, who will be with you all in a couple weeks. Christian here.
And I'm curious, as we start this, how you all are tracking dosage. I think it seems to me new conversations that I've started hearing with among treatment providers and correctional staff about really trying to capture that. So I'm curious, how are you able to do that in your agency right now? How are you doing that? What works, what doesn't work? I think, I mean, as Jessica has pointed out, there's really, I think, the tracking of dosage is really this idea of how do you start to individualize your treatment plan for your clients, right? So how do you really start to think about this person's assessed needs and how you can kind of, again, adjust that dosage so they're getting more of what they do need and less of what they don't need. I think it's also a helpful way from a program level to think about, you all have limited resources, right? So how do you make decisions around, this is enough or this is the goal, and we know that going beyond this level probably isn't going to get us added benefits. So we can kind of start to triage as your resources are limited, how you target those resources.
Also, another thing to consider, this spreadsheet is holding a lot of information. And so you may already have some strategic goals or some ways that you are already, or areas you're already looking at as a program or agency. If you want our eyes and our support in just focusing on one of those areas, if you want to look at that group observation form and you want more resources there to say, like, how do I know? Or can you help me? I sort of distill down how my groups are doing across all of my groups so I can understand the intensity or that potency in the group intervention. That's a way that we could take this too. So we really just want to be available to sort of look at where you're at, answer that to the best of your, that you can within the next couple weeks, and we can take it from there and discuss more.
So our plan is to, in the next session, Derek will be presenting kind of the findings from what you all currently have. I mean, our intent is beyond that, as Jessica mentioned, that if there's specific questions you have, that our staff would be available to kind of help you through your spreadsheet. And again, what we sent you is a sample of a way to start thinking about it. I don't know that I think it's feasible for anyone to track all of those things, because that's a lot of things. So it's really intended to give you several different examples of how you could think about dosage, right? So it might be that for you right now, you're really like, we just need to get the days and the hours. And that's where our focus is. But giving you a chance to kind of further develop your dosage. Anything that we don't address next week, again, we're happy to meet with staff one-on-one. We have done that with some programs already, where we're actually just having individual conversations with programs to help them kind of hammer out the elements of dosage. Any questions, comments? I feel like I came into this thinking, oh no, I have to talk really, really fast. No, I could have talked 5 minutes slower than I did. I think if you all have questions, if you don't, I don't want to keep you here indefinitely. We'll hope that you do feel like you can send some data to us so that we can help kind of show you what you could do with that, or how you could use that to understand what you're doing. Thank you. Love to see group observation sheet. The family members. Yes, I think, Andrea, thank you for that comment, that that work with family members could really count. I think there's probably a lot of things that we haven't been counting as treatment that we could count as treatment, and things that we do count that we maybe shouldn't count. So again, when I think about case management, there are elements of that, depending on how your program works, that do count, and there's probably aspects of that that don't count. I was reading an article yesterday that really talked about, this is for folks in the community, but giving them an assignment to do role plays and practice with friends and family, and that why would you not count that, particularly if there's some attempt to really structure, like do some training with the friends and family, so that that practice is happening with a group who has been trained and kind of knows the goal of it. List all the things out that count and do not count. Yes, so I would be happy to put that together. I think one thing to have a little caveat on that is that we have not studied dosage as well as we can. So I think we know some things, and we have some information about things that are possibilities. But I think, why not try that? Thank you, Marie, about the administrative elements of dosage. Yeah, and I think, again, it's hard. This requires, I mean, programs are strapped, right? It's hard to kind of do the program and then track, like, wait, that 20 minutes shouldn't have counted. So I think an easier way to do that might be to just think kind of generally for all our groups, let's assume that 15 minutes of every group is not actually specifically focused on treatment, right? So I think if it can't be tracked individually for every single group, just making some agency decisions at that level. I will definitely, to respond to Andrea, send out to the group a list of things that fully count, maybe could count, and probably shouldn't count. If that is, then you can kind of, if that's helpful in terms of making decisions around what you want to count and not. And I would say one thing too is monitor it. If you're trying new things, like, pay attention to it and see if you're seeing impact on your clients' risk levels. I mean, I think that's we are always encouraging folks to pilot new interventions. I think, why not spend a month piloting some ways of capturing dosage and then tracking what you see in terms of your impact on your clients. Okay, so my follow-up is to send you all a list of things that do and don't count. We have about 2 minutes left. If there are questions, I want to give folks the opportunity to ask them. Otherwise, our staff is, of course, available. We hope, we're going to be very sad if we have no data for next week.
Sounds like Andrea's gonna definitely
awesome.
help us out there.
Thank you, Andrea. So, yeah, and again, any of you who have questions, it would just be helpful to have us kind of help look through your data with you specifically. We definitely are open to doing that.
Yeah, this session's meant to be really practical, just to put it within the container. The past series that just finished with our director, Dr. Salisbury, is available on YouTube if you didn't get a chance to view that. That was on case planning to target criminogenic need. If you want access to that for yourself or your staff, let us know. We've also got a reading group coming up in December. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking like, I'd like to discuss the concepts We're looking at what works and doesn't. Christian Sarver, Dr. Sarver will be leading that. And then the final week we'll have the authors. So looking at the themes of what works and what doesn't in reducing recidivism. That's coming up in December. I can send you the link to register if you don't have it. If it's okay, I'm just gonna wrap up. Please add your questions. We will attend to those. Thank you for joining us for the first in 2 events. Sorry, go ahead, Christian.
Sorry, Jessica, can I add one thing? So the authors for that book are the folks who really have developed the R&R model. So for those of you who love or feel oppressed by R&R, it is your opportunity to really ask those folks questions. Yeah. So it's a great opportunity for us to really talk to the individuals who have conducted all the research that supports the efficacy of R&R.
And just to touch on, Marie, thank you so much for that point. That is our hope, is that we have folks that are willing to kind of give us a glimpse of the way that they're collecting and using data, and to really build this style of event as a strength, peer building, or, you know, where peer information, you all have the way that you're collecting data, we can highlight those strengths and work together in a very practical way. So that's really the goal of this session. Hope that you all decide to submit some data so we can answer your request, Marie. Yeah, so ucjc.utah.edu is our website. ucjc@utah.edu is email address, although you may have, some of you may already have our other emails, so please feel free to reach out directly. We hope to review 1 to 2 specifically next week, just so that it's very thorough based on our time. But depending on the number of submissions, we'll discuss how we make sure to attend to those submissions as well. We hope that you found this short introduction to using your program data, and specifically Dosage, informative and useful. Know that these sessions are short, so if you have questions and comments after the closure of this meeting, again, reach out by email. Our final session is in 2 weeks. Next week, we have a great event partnering with the College of Social Work. Maybe I'll let Christian speak to that quickly if you want to join us again next week. But this event will be October 22nd at noon.
And next week's event is John Pfaff, who will be talking about the role of prosecutorial decision-making in terms of mass incarceration. So that is up on the College of Social website. There's more information about that. It's nice to see you all. I hate people who keep me longer than they said they would. So here you go. See you all in 2 weeks.